Today's podcast is sponsored by AMAC. It's the only conservative alternative to that other group. Join today at amac.us/Carter. Today, I'm joined by energy and climate philosopher Alex Epstein. He is incredible. Talk about someone who can literally lay it all out, explaining why fossil fuels are so important and why we don't need to be afraid of them, why we don't need to hate fossil fuels, why we are a part of the whole fossil fuel system on the planet. So he's going to come here. He's going to, for those of you who are, anti-human, anti-fossil fuel, I guarantee just listen to him. Listen to what he has to say. It's going to blow your mind because we will be talking about the lies of the green movement and how human anti-energy policy, anti-human energy policy will lead to catastrophic outcomes. I'll also cover a new whistleblower report. Listen to this, that claims the Biden FBI has the evidence of Hunter Biden's crooked dealings with China. They have it. The FBI. Why hasn't anything been done? Why do they waste our money and our taxpayer dollars and our time targeting what we already know was a lie, which is President Trump? They're like looking for anything. It's like they're preoccupied, right? The Biden administration knows what's been going on. People within his administration, his son, the father, the corruption. Hopefully something will be done. So don't go anywhere. Do not go anywhere. You do not want to miss this podcast. Hey, everyone, please follow and subscribe. Get all the links at saracarter.com, saracarter.com for all your social media links. And while you are there, sign up for our email list so that you don't get shadow banned. Folks, I talk a lot about Mike Lindell. Mike Lindell is not only a friend, he is a true American patriot, and his company, My Pillow, My Store, are part of that growing patriotism here in America, supporting American-made products. And right now, he has the sale of the year on all My Percal bed sheets. This is My Pillow's Percal bed sheets. Listen to this. Queen price regularly $89.98. Now you're going to get it for $39.98. And believe me, the holidays, Christmas is literally just around the corner. And what better gift to get your college-age student, family member than brand new set of sheets? Because they are really, really at the best prices you're ever going to get them for right now. You're not going to find this anywhere else. $39.98, folks. Go to mypillow.com/Carter or call 1-800-685-7221 for deep discounts on the My Pillow Percal bed sheets. Queen size regular $89.98, on sale now for only $39.98. While you're there, take advantage of the buy one get one free sale on My Pillows, towels, and so much more. Visit mypillow.com/Carter or call 1-800-685-7221 today for the sale of the year on My Pillow Percal bed sheets. mypillow.com/Carter or call 1-800-685-7221. So let's just start out. Before we get to Alex Epstein, let's just talk about the FBI. Now, I am trying to read up on a lot more historical books. And I'm reading this phenomenal book, which I hear is going to be made into a movie. It's The Killing of the Flower Moon. It's different than Empire of the Summer Moon, which I read before. Killing of the Flower Moon is basically about the Osage reservation, the murders that occurred on the Osage reservation in the 1920s, late teens, 1918 and so forth. And it was about the very beginning of the FBI. This is why I'm talking about this. The Osage murders, which many people have forgotten about, were 24 murders that occurred on a reservation. The reservation in Oklahoma was basically sitting on like so much oil and gas. I mean, it was just literally this reservation was unexpectedly, the Native Americans that took this land had no idea what was under the earth. became one of the richest communities in all of the United States of America. And the reason I bring this up, because not only were they treated, it was horrific what happened to the Osage. And this whole story is just one revelation after another. Killing of the Flower Moon. If you guys have not read it, please do. It will be made into a movie. It's a phenomenal book. I like to throw out books that I like. And this is a historical book, but it's going to blow your mind because it talks about the beginning of the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. And before it actually became the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it was the Bureau of Investigation. And they had some of the old Texas Rangers, which had originally come on board with this new idea of creating a national police force. Now, during the 1920s, during the early 1900s, most Americans were so opposed to creating a national police force. They were afraid that if they created a national police force, it would be rife with corruption. Hello, they were right. That there would be issues with a national police force. Every state had their own and every jurisdiction had their own, local law enforcement or state had their own law enforcement. But this idea of having a national police force, and especially an armed one, because at the very beginning, the FBI was not armed. It was unarmed. So during the I would say pre-FBI, on the Osage reservation, there was a massive problem. 24 people poisoned, killed, one person, a family blown up in their own home. And I don't want to give away the whole story because I think for those of you who want to read the book, it's going to be an eye-opener. But it talks about J. Edgar Hoover, and he was like this young, skinny kid at the time, who had all these ideas of how he was going to create this bureaucracy, came from a long line of bureaucrats. There was this push in the Bureau of Investigation at the time. No more were the Texas Rangers, going crazy out on the frontier with their weapons and, fighting the Native Americans here like the Comanches or the Tonkins. Everything was kind of transitioning. The West had kind of already been won, so to speak. And so some of the old Texas Rangers joined the Bureau of Investigation. And the reason why I bring this up is because we've been talking about corruption right now over and over again. I talk about it on my show. You and I are very well familiar, I know, with what happened with President Trump. For those of you that have been listening to me for a while, a lot of the stories that John Solomon and I worked on, a lot of them focused on the FBI, the corruption within the FBI, Andy McCabe, second in command over at the FBI to James Comey, and how he got fired and how everything was very insular, and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and their torrid affair, and the fact that they were working, against the president of the United States. That's just a fact. Look at their text messages, all of those revelations, and also the fact that nobody was ever held accountable, right? For what they did to a duly elected president. Well, those are the same questions that people had in the 1920s at the very beginning. And by the way, J. Edgar Hoover, he sends this guy out. His name was White. White got totally screwed by J. Edgar Hoover. Read the book. But here's this guy who was a Texas Ranger. Now he's investigating all these murders in the, in the Osage Reservation and doing what nobody else was doing for the Native Americans living on that reservation, who, by the way, this is a really incredible little piece of, trivia. There was so much money on the reservation that the natives, because they would get paid the certain amount of money every month for the amount of oil that was pumped out of the earth. And of course, there was so much money that the women on the reservation, they were wearing like clothes from Paris. They had the best china. They had amazing homes. They had all of these things. But guess what? They were also given guardianships during that time. A white person, per se, was in charge of their money and doling out their allowances every month on their own land. How crazy was that? And then here comes this guy, White. He's investigating. Right? And J. Edgar Hoover basically hid, and I'm just throwing it out there, hid a lot of the truth about what happened during those investigations from the public. And he used the great work of some of these Texas Rangers who investigated and eventually found out who was committing all these murders. He used them for his benefit. J. Edgar Hoover did, to start the FBI, to become eventually a national, massive police force, right? National police force. And that's when J. Edgar Hoover started getting files on people, collecting data on politicians. He had separate files, J. Edgar Hoover did. Separate files from the ones that were actually legit. The ones that he kept for himself, he used to blackmail people. Think about that. And now we see a Washington Examiner report that the FBI has voluminous evidence of Hunter Biden's potential criminal conduct. But this came from whistleblowers, right? We've seen a lot of whistleblowers coming out, talking to Chuck Grassley. Thank God that there are good people within the FBI that are willing to speak out. Thank God. Because there are good people there. But the foundation of this entity, of the bureau, of this bureaucracy, like Shakespeare says, there is something rotten in Denmark. There is something rotten at the FBI. And it's been there. It's been there in its leadership since the formulation of the FBI. Just read stories. And what am I going to get now? Is someone going to listen to my phone calls because I said that? No, it's a fact. It's a fact. And that's why we have good people in the FBI now blowing the whistle, right? So the FBI basically, and if you guys have been following the Durham trial, you see all these new revelations that now Robert Mueller, remember, former head of the FBI, who became the special counsel prosecutor, against President Trump, that they were lying, basically, allegedly lying to Congress, that they had information, that they had sources, that they knew Christopher Steele's dossier was a bunch of bullshit, but they didn't care. They didn't care. They did whatever they wanted. They did whatever they wanted for political purposes, for their own purposes, and they are still doing that. So now, back to the future. Here we are right now, Washington Examiner. The FBI is in possession of voluminous evidence of potential criminal misconduct by President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, related to his overseas business dealings with China and Ukraine. Remember we were writing about that? Remember when John Solomon was writing that? When I was writing about that? When we had the whistleblower? Do you remember that? And we put out all those stories about all of the criminal misconduct that was possibly happening, the alleged misconduct with the whistleblower, it said, and how everybody, at that time, Democrats, lawmakers, everybody who had any power in Washington, D.C. was trying to target those stories. Nah, not true. No, can't be. No, they're all good. Now look at this. We have FBI coming out and saying, well, wait a minute. I'm a whistleblower. We have information. Senator Chuck Grassley, who's amazing, by the way, he had released whistleblower claims alleging that evidence on Hunter Biden's criminality was wrongly labeled disinformation within the Bureau, made the revelations in a Thursday letter obtained by the Washington Examiner. It was sent to Attorney General Merrick Garland's office, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and the Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who is running the criminal investigation into Hunter Biden. The whistleblower allegations relate to Hunter as well as to James Biden, the president's brother, regarding the duo's dealing with the Chinese government-linked energy conglomerate CEFC China Energy. They also relate to the younger Biden's work for Ukraine gas giant Burisma Holdings. Now, where is that familiar? Remember my whistleblower, William Campbell, who came out with all the information on Burisma Holdings? Lo and behold, the FBI apparently has information on all of that. Remember when Hunter Biden was sitting on Burisma's board? He can't even speak Russian. He knows nothing about gas or energy. What do you call that? I call it influence. That's what it was about. It was about influence. It was about access to the father who was the vice president of the United States of America under Obama. I call it access to the father who is now the president of the United States of America. His entire family appears to have been pocketing money. James Biden, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, the whole Biden clan. Can you imagine if your husband or my husband and my husband before he retired? I mean, he had a very high security level clearance. My husband did. If I conducted any business with a foreign national and I did not disclose that or did not have some authority to do so, I would probably end up in jail. Instead, we have a president in the White House now who was literally dealing with our adversaries, the Chinese and the Ukrainians, and by the way, and the Russians, by the way, because there's information now that they were pocketing so much money connected to Russian oligarchs. Do you see what's happening here, guys? Do you see what's unraveling right before our very eyes? But guess what? Who's going to hold them accountable? Who is going to hold all of these people accountable for what they have done to our country, our Constitution, the presidency, the American taxpayer? I don't know. I really don't know. But I want to read this to you. Based on recent protected disclosures to my office, said Senator Grassley, the FBI has within its possession significant, impactful, and voluminous evidence with respect to potential criminal conduct by Hunter Biden and James Biden. The evidence within the FBI's possession that I am referencing is included in part in a summary of Tony Bobulinski's October. Remember Tony Bobulinski? He came out. He wasn't lying. I remember when he was talking to Tucker Carlson, it was like straight up. Like, this is what I know. This is what was going on with the family. And this is what I'm going to tell you, because he was very concerned about this, very concerned that we have a president that could be in the pocket of the Chinese, that could be in the pocket of the Ukrainians. You want to talk about compromise? For everyone out there that tried to say President Trump was connected to the Russians, which we all know now is a lie, why don't they just reverse that and put it on the man they supported into the White House? Because that's exactly what this is. In an interview, Mr. Bobulinski stated that the arrangement Hunter Biden and James Biden created with foreign nationals connected to the communist Chinese government included assisting them with potential business deals and investments while Joe Biden was vice president. However, that work remained intentionally uncompensated while Joe Biden was vice president. Doesn't matter. It's never uncompensated. It's never uncompensated. He is the vice president of the United States. You don't need to trade money back and forth that way. You can do it through corporations. You can do it through favors. You can do it through negotiations, right? Things that we don't even think of as regular folks, right? After Joe Biden left the vice presidency, the summary makes clear that Hunter Biden and James Biden worked with CEFC and affiliated individuals to compensate them for that past work and the benefits they procured for CEFC. Think about that. Think about what is going on here. Think about how that has affected us as a nation. More importantly, folks, it's corruption at the deepest levels, because now our Department of Justice is all we have. That is the reason why these FBI agents are blowing the whistle. They're blowing the whistle because they know they can't go forward with their investigations, because they're being stymied every step of the way. That is the real reason why these FBI agents are going to people like Senator Grassley, are talking to lawmakers, because they have no other choice, because the system itself is rotten. And that is a frightening, frightening situation as an American. This isn't about loving Trump or loving so-and-so or whatever. This is about the right thing, doing the right thing as Americans. This is about holding people accountable who literally trampled our Constitution, who don't care one iota about the sacrifices you and I, my husband, and others have made for our country or our forefathers. These people only care about themselves. They are corrupt at the core. And when you got one rotten apple, it spreads. And they have created this, it's like a virus almost. Everything they touch, they infect. Everything they touch, they infect. And it just crawls across the entire bureaucracy, the swamp, like a monster. Remember when we talked about cleaning out the swamp? Remember in the very beginning when Trump he ran on that. He wanted to clean out the swamp, and then the swamp activated against him and is still, by the way, activating against him. There are people here, these whistleblowers that have talked to Dan Bongino, whistleblowers who have talked to me, whistleblowers who have talked to Senator Chuck Grassley and others that are saying, look, wake up, America, wake up. We have to revamp our system. We have to disinfect our system before it's too late. We have to protect our young nation before these corrupt, thoroughly corruptible people destroy it. And that's what we've got to do. And that's why come November, we have to vote these corrupt lawmakers out of office. And come 2024, we have to put a new president in that is not going to be afraid, who knows the system and who knows how to root out the corruption and end it once and for all. Because if we don't, I'm afraid we're going to lose our nation. He is the author of Fossil Future: Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal, and Natural Gas. Since May, his book has rocketed, this is so exciting, Alex, to the top of the oil and energy industry list and is a Amazon #1 bestseller. How exciting is that? You must be very thrilled.
Well, it's exciting, although those categories are a little bit, you can sort of rise to the top of those, but I would say I'm very happy that it's hit the Amazon top 100, I think, a couple times, which is really hard to do because you're competing with all these fiction books and this kind of thing. And so I'm really happy. It actually outsold every book on the New York Times bestseller list but one, but they didn't put it on the list. So I called it a New York Times outseller.
Well, that's the point. I'm surprised they have not censored you yet for the truth. Cause that's what I'm just like, wait a minute, what's going to happen? When is Alex going to face the wrath? And I'm glad you're not facing it.
Actually, I did.
Oh,
I don't know if
really?
you know about this. Well, yeah, the Washington Post, a month or two before the book came out, tried a cancel campaign on me to cancel me as a racist of all things, which is really weird because I've been an individualist all my life on every issue, including issues of skin color. But yeah, there was this whole story. If people want to check it out, if they just search, I guess if they search Alex Epstein Washington Post, they'll probably just have the Washington Post article because the Google is terrible on me. But what they were planning on running a story saying that I'm a racist. And then what I did is I posted something on Twitter totally refuting this, and I preempted the story. And so then they delayed the story and they took out all the references to racism. And it got a lot of positive attention to the book, but it was kind of a blueprint of how to deal with these irrational cancel things. But yeah, it was, but it really showed me, hey, we sent them a copy of the book, and instead of reading the book and even critiquing it, they decided to try to out me as something I wasn't. So it really shows the lack of intellectual engagement that the other side is doing with these views.
Not only the lack of intellectual engagement, which is I think they were supposed to be the opposite of, when we think of the Washington Post, when we think of the New York Times, these massive institutions, American institutions where we're supposed to be getting and receiving objective journalism, or at least even if someone is even writing an editorial, to contact the person they're writing about and try to get the full facts. But the fact that they make up lies now, it's not just about just being a contrarian, right? It's disparaging. They take people, we've seen the lawsuits against these massive media empires because they've just completely flat out lied about certain issues and topics. Does that bother you? Is that disappointing to you? You're someone who's writing about, you're trying to lay out these facts the way that you see them. You're a philosopher. You're laying them out. You're showing the reasons why you support your ideas right here. You're laying it out before the public in a book. But to have a place of journalism, something that was once respected, target you, that's got to be just gut-wrenching sometimes to think like, well, look what we're up against.
It's fundamentally disappointing that this is the state of the culture and these institutions, because these institutions really have a valuable role. And in Fossil Future, I refer to them as disseminators, because they're the ones who are supposed to disseminate to us information about important developments in various fields. And I'm somebody who's one of the more influential people on energy policy in the world. I had a best-selling book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, in 2014, and I spent over 3 years thinking about and researching this thing to a degree where if people saw the effort involved and the difficulty involved, they would never even consider doing something. And so, but I guess more importantly, from their perspective, I'm an influential person. I work with 100 plus elected official offices. I've influenced a lot of people. They're supposed to be reporting on me having a new book, and instead, and engaging it, and their editorial people should say, hey, is this good or not? But instead of doing that, they tried to just say, hey, nothing to see here. This guy's a racist, so don't read his book. And in particular, the argument they wanted to frame me as a racist over is my argument that poorer people around the world desperately need fossil fuels because that's their only path out of poverty. And instead of engaging that argument, which they have no refutation for, they tried to say, oh, he's a racist, so he doesn't really care about those people, so you shouldn't listen to him, which is just such a terrible argument. It doesn't make any sense. The argument is true, whatever my character. The fact I'm an individualist made it even more egregious. But they should be reporting on new ideas and commenting on them editorially, instead of trying to discredit people who have new ideas and try to tell the public, hey, nothing to see here. So I'm glad I was able to overcome that, but it is an exact reversal of their role.
Right. And it is a constant struggle, because while you're overcoming that, I mean, that's a big, big hill, a big mountain, I would think, to overcome. I want you to have a moment to explain this, because your focus on the most poverty-stricken and how we need as societies to come out of that poverty. You can't do it alone. And we can see right now across the globe, as winter is approaching, what this energy crisis, quote unquote, is going to do to the people. I'm not talking about the planet. The planet, I think, will be fine. I'm in agreement with you. But with the people that are going to be suffering through this based on the fallacies and the lies of our government officials and these non-for-profits that are feeding the lies to the planet, and when we have the resources to actually take care of them, but they're being, obviously, we see the manipulation, we see what's happened with Vladimir Putin, and the fact that I think we've just handed him the, energy on a silver platter. He's had this power. The Europeans should have never been in this predicament. But talk a little bit about what you mean when you talk about getting the poor out, of this by focusing, you say, not, on the future. This isn't a racist comment. This is actually common sense, right?
Well, I guess maybe it should be common sense. I mean, the basic thing is that by default, everyone is poor. So poverty is the natural condition of human beings. And the reason is because the planet doesn't give us many usable resources, and it gives us a lot of threats. So the normal condition of life is it's deficient and it's dangerous. And the only way to come out of that is to be very productive. And the only way to be very productive is to use machines to produce a lot more value than we can do using our fairly meager physical bodies. And so what energy does is it allows us to use machines to produce 10, 50, 100 times more value so that we can go from a deficient and dangerous world to an abundant and safe world. And my observation is that those of us in the wealthy world, we all do this using significant amounts of fossil fuel, because that's the only form of energy that can be low cost, reliable, power every type of machine, not just ones based on electricity, and that can do it for billions of people in thousands of places. So our whole standard of living depends on fossil fuels. And yet there's been a movement to say that poor people should somehow not use fossil fuels, even though we're not able to do that ourselves. And I've pointed out, this is incredibly incredibly destructive. If you look at the poorer places that have risen out of poverty, most notably China, but also India, they've done it by quintupling their use of fossil fuels to go from unproductive and poor to relatively productive and prosperous. And so what we've seen, though, with the energy crisis is not only are we opposing poorer people bringing themselves up with fossil fuels, but we're restricting the availability of fossil fuels to the point where the wealthy world is suffering massively as well, which means the poor world is going to suffer even more. So what you're seeing in the US, we see rising electricity prices, particularly in the East. We see rising gasoline prices. But in Europe, it's incomparably worse. I mean, there you have fertilizer factories shutting down, which affects food production. You have all kinds of people saying, like, you can't, in Spain, it was you can't cool buildings below 81 degrees Fahrenheit. You see restrictions on hot water all over Germany, and we haven't even hit winter yet. And so you just put it this way, Europe is afraid of winter. That is embarrassing. Human beings should not be afraid of winter for the last 75 years at least. Like,
that's
we're
what I was
so
going
far
to say.
past
In
that
the modern age, in the modern age, we should not be this terrified, right?
Of cold, and the world's supposedly too warm, and we're terrified of cold, which also shows that actually cold is more of a danger than warmth, which is just one of the many things that this whole climate catastrophe thing doesn't recognize. So just to finish the point with the poorer people, though, what happens is energy prices, when they go up, that means the price of everything produced by machines goes up, which means the price of everything goes up. And so what you have there is, you can have doubling and tripling of food prices. I was in Egypt and I was talking to people and they experienced this, like, hey, this sandwich used to cost 1/3 what it costs now. And they'd say, you the tourist, it's not a big deal. It seems cheap to you, but to us, it's really crippling because our salaries are definitely not increasing by that much. And so you just have this global crisis. And the basic reason is because we artificially restricted the supply of fossil fuels by opposing fossil fuel investment, fossil fuel production, fossil fuel transportation. And that meant that we couldn't deal with it when we had more demand post-pandemic, which was very predictable. And then also when there have been issues with Russian supply and the threat of taking that off. But if we had liberated fossil fuel production and transportation here and in other free places, we would not have anywhere near this problem. So it's very much, Putin is evil in his own way, but we should not be, Europe should not be dependent on him. And even we should not be dependent on him to the degree that we are.
100%. 100%. I believe we just handed him like the silver platter is what I'm saying of energy, because we shut down the Keystone XL pipeline. We have this, administration now that is utterly opposed to doing what is needed in order to be energy free and not be reliant. But still, you see the Biden administration going overseas, searching other places, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. It doesn't matter. It could be our adversaries. We're looking at them, but it doesn't even make any sense because it's the same production that we could be doing here to setting our own nation free, to protecting our own national security, and to helping our own people, right, our own country stay independent from I would say the clutches and the shackles of people like Vladimir Putin. And we're seeing what's happened right now.
So I'm curious, do you have why? I'm curious. I have an idea about this, but I'm curious. Why do you think they're doing that? Because I think for most people it must seem insane, right? That you see Biden begging Saudi Arabia, begging Venezuela, and yet not liberating production here. So what do you think is going on there?
Well, I certainly believe there are people that are working against our own nation's best interests and for their own interest. And that interest is something very different than what we, I think, as Americans have always had in mind: our independence, our liberty, our freedom. This is now, I'm just throwing out a guess there. But I cannot believe that this administration is so stupid that its decision-making and policy-making is not based on some type of chess game for the future. And that they are breaking us down. I have an idea that they're throwing power another way. We've seen that in other administrations. This is not about putting our nation first. This is about putting other things first and other people first.
one dynamic I think is at work here, and you see this in Europe as well, is the anti-fossil fuel movement has been unable to reverse their long-term plan, which is the rapid elimination of fossil fuels. But so what they're stuck with then is doing short-term things on the consumer side. So to have production, you need to engage in long-range behavior because the producers need to know, hey, there's a future. If you say to them, hey, I guarantee you we will end fossil fuel, they're not going to be that eager. Or if you say we're going to ban leasing on federal lands, they're not going to be eager if you threaten them with ESG. So what happens is Europe did the same thing. They have this long-term plan that cripples their ability to produce. And what they're left with is short-term begging from the people who aren't following those plans, which are mainly the less free countries. So you have Russia, China, Venezuela. And so it's this crazy situation where people say, like, why don't we liberate the Permian Basin? But that would require a switch of the long-term anti-fossil fuel commitment. And they're still not willing to abandon that dogma. I hope the American people are starting to be. So that as long as you have that dogma, you're going to restrict your own production, but you're still going to need the fossil fuel. So you're just going to be at the mercy of all of these countries, including very unfree countries, adversarial countries, for the supply. If you don't supply it, you're going to be dependent on them supplying it.
So throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, just because you believe it, just because you've done this, just because you've spoken out publicly about this, because you have to keep ridiculous companies like Solarna and stuff, and keep feeding the lie, right? Is that what you're saying? They're just continuing to feed the lie? Or because eventually the chickens are going to come home to roost. And I'm using a lot of these little phrases.
It's happening. It's happening now. So I think there is this really, I'm going to write about this on Twitter this week in terms of some of the trends going on that I think are affecting the future of energy. You have this really interesting trend where this anti-fossil fuel movement has caused a global energy crisis. The leaders of that movement are still in denial. And yet there's a growing group of us who are becoming more prominent, who are pointing out that they caused the crisis and that we need basically energy freedom going forward, including the freedom to use fossil fuels. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops because the establishment is so big and yet they're so unpopular right now, which is why Biden has bent over backwards to say, with no credibility, hey, we've done nothing to restrict fossil fuels. That's been their narrative.
Which is a lie because they have. I mean, they talk about the leases on the land, but nobody's signing off on them. But they're not allowing that freedom of energy. They are not allowing that to happen. I wanted to ask you this. I have a friend who's in Europe now, and they were discussing about the issue of the deforesting. They're seeing like the Europeans, in Germany, when my friend Michael Jan was there and he was like, look, they're cutting down all the forests in Europe and they can't even use that wood. That wood's not even usable. They're not going to be able to dry it in time. He's seeing changes all throughout Europe. This idea of who controls energy controls the world is becoming very prominent now in Europe. And they're talking about this, but at the expense of, I think, their own countries, not only energy crisis, but their economics as well as their own well-being. How concerned should people be? I mean, about the energy crisis? To me, that is a significant problem if we're looking towards a future of instability. There's concern about war. I mean, we're really putting the power in the hands of players like Vladimir Putin and others, China, Iran, our enemies, Venezuela. I mean, what happens if we don't take control again? I mean, you're the philosopher.
You're seeing with Europe, you hear these different stories of their, cutting down trees, burning. There's a lot of garbage burning going on. You hear different stories at different times about people burning old books, huddling in buses, huddling in libraries. I mean, this should scare you. And a lot of what happens there will be dependent on the weather, which is embarrassing. But if they have an unusually cold winter, it'll be much, much worse. If they have a more mild winter, they may get away without total devastation. But even what's happened so far should just be a giant wake-up call to say that, hey, we need to produce abundant energy, and that today and for the foreseeable future requires fossil fuels. And if you're a fossil fuel denier, fossil fuel benefit denier, like so much of Europe has been, you put yourself in this incredibly precarious position. And it sounds so nice when you're saying you're going to do it, but then when you're actually short of energy, you do all of these desperate things. And that's why, have people burning garbage. I mean, you think like in their homes and this kind of thing. And it's because energy is so crucial to life. You cannot live in a modern world without energy, and you need energy most basically for heat. And when it gets cold, and Europe's a cold place, like they'll burn whatever they can find. So this state of desperation should show we've gone, 5 steps in the wrong direction. This is not a borderline mistake. We've made a catastrophic mistake, and let's learn from this. Let's not wait for the literal apocalypse of just the whole world is short of energy, because that's going to be, you see these riots in poor countries. Right. I mean, that could happen here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you see studies being done, I remember I read a Heritage Foundation study one time where they were talking about, what would the effects, and this is going a little bit off of the energy crisis, but it kind of goes to it. What would the effects be of a massive EMP attack, if it was possible? Like if all the energy, if our grid system was shut down across the nation, it would be catastrophic. It would literally be apocalyptic. I mean, you think about it, what we need energy for and why fossil fuels are so important. And I think why, as modern human beings, we've made our world, I agree with you, a better place. And I think it's crazy that those that are leading us are talking about how negative we are, all you have to do is read history to realize that modern humans are much, much more accepting, much more loving, cleaner in general than our predecessors, where they were survivors. We're here now. But how dangerous a situation our country would be in if we lost. Do you ever think about that? You're the philosopher. If we lost access to our hospitals, or there was an energy crisis and, we weren't able to keep generators running, or we didn't have access to our vehicles, or, the grocery stores, or our refrigerators weren't able to run, so we weren't able to keep our food fresh, things like that. I mean, we don't know how to kind of live like our ancestors did, really. I mean, I think it would be a real big struggle in the beginning, right?
Well, and there's the issue of just we don't have the same skills that they did, but also the world is not naturally a livable place for even 1 billion people, let alone 8 billion people. So the ability to support 8 billion people depends on the productive ability of the people, and in particular, our machines that we have today. So you really have to think of these machines as these are life-sustaining things. Like without all of these machines producing all this value for us, literally 8 billion people cannot survive. And you have to think with the basics. We have, of course, electricity everywhere. So if the grid shuts down from EMP or something else, just catastrophic shortages, that's an issue. When you have fuel issues, when you have natural gas issues, that goes into fertilizer in particular. That's why, in part, why you're seeing rising food prices. And then if you get into fuel, oil, then, that affects agriculture through all the diesel powered machines, but just all the vehicles that are transporting everything. We have a trade-based society where we need low cost to transact with one another. If that doubles or triples, that totally changes the whole world. So people are they think of, one way I put it in Fossil Futures, people think of the earth as this delicate nurturer and it takes care of us. But if we impact it, it's all going to collapse. And it's not at all true. Earth is not a delicate nurturer at all. It's like wild potential. We need to make it good and impact it. But in a sense, the energy system is a delicate nurturer. Like if you screw with that system, you stop the grid from working, or you make fuel prices way, way higher, that wrecks everything. And so people really, when they think of a livable planet, they need to think of our energy systems first and foremost, not, the climate's going to be 1 degree warmer, and that's the big deal.
Right. So break down some of the problems with energy sources, like for people that are advocating for solar panels or wind farms. We saw that happen here in Texas during the first really big cold winter snap. What happened with the wind farms out here where I live? Are they more humane than fossil fuels? I mean, I think we've already kind of laid that out. But if you were arguing with somebody as to why these don't work, what would you tell them?
Well, I think the key is when you're thinking of these alternatives, are you thinking of them as replacements that justify restricting and eliminating fossil fuels? Or are you thinking of them as supplements that are going to add to fossil fuels? Or are you thinking of them as experiments? So I think right now, solar and wind are mostly in the position of experiments. So they have not done a good job so far of even supplementing fossil fuels. In most places they're used, the prices go up. And the basic reason is because they're unreliable. So they can go near zero at any time, which means you have to pay for the solar and wind infrastructure, including all the panels and turbines, but also the long distance transmission lines. But then you still have to pay for the reliable energy infrastructure. And if you skimp on that, which Texas has done at a time of increasing demand, you also skimp on things like weatherization, then what's going to happen is when you have an adverse weather event, you're not going to have much sun, you're not going to have much wind, and you didn't have as much reliable capacity. So even as experiments, they are having big problems, and as modest supplements. But then if you're talking about them as replacements, that's insane because the world needs far more energy. So the idea of talking about reducing fossil fuel use from an energy perspective means guaranteeing, billions of people will be impoverished. So it's not necessarily that you're pro fossil fuels and therefore anti solar and wind. You should be anti, I think, forced solar and wind, which I am. And you definitely need to be realistic about how unsuccessful these technologies are so far. And by the way, they just provide electricity, which right now is about a fifth of the world's energy. So there are lots of different kinds of energy besides electricity. So the key is the idea of them replacing fossil fuels is a horrifically destructive idea. And what happened is because people think they can replace fossil fuels, they restricted fossil fuels on the false promise that unreliable solar and wind could replace them. And that was the big mistake. People will say, hey, what's the problem with, quote, investing in green energy? Well, one is you're taking our money by force. And if it was really good, why can't it truly compete? But the other thing is the main destruction is it's used to justify all the anti-fossil fuel policies because we have this false reassurance that they'll replace fossil fuels. And that's why the green energy movement is responsible for the energy crisis.
Do you think sometimes, and I'm sure you have to, I don't, there's information out there that focuses on how like other countries who do and admit, that we need fossil fuels, they might not admit it publicly, but we see with Vladimir Putin and Nord Stream 2 and everything else and Gazprom and all of these, they'll be maybe financing like on the down low some of our NGOs that are focused on just purely ending fossil fuels, this push by these nonprofit organizations to basically, fight the fossil fuel industry at every turn. Could it be used against us? I mean, could these groups, these special interest groups, be used literally as kind of a weapon against us by these ideologies and pushing these ideologies that we know really are antithetical to the future of our nation and our energy independence?
Well, if you were an adversary of the United States, you would certainly want to fund all of these organizations that have policies and ideas that are gutting the energy abilities of the United States. But that it does happen and it makes sense. But a lot of it is just domestic. I mean, it's this domestic false idea that we need to rapidly eliminate fossil fuels. Because it's coming from the Rockefeller Foundation,
right? The
Ford Foundation, Jeff Bezos. These are all, very productive institutions or people that for various reasons think that the right path is getting rid of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And so that's the real problem, is just the idea that we should rapidly eliminate fossil fuels to prevent climate apocalypse. It's that idea that is at the root of that. And yes, our adversaries will use it, but also many domestic allies and many Americans who are not being funded externally are hugely, hugely bankrolling this. So it's whoever is bankrolling it internationally, it's really the idea that's the problem because it's still getting plenty of money domestically.
That's just absolutely stunning to me. And the majority of those, in some of them that you mentioned, Jeff Bezos, the Rockefeller Foundation, all of these, Bill Gates, I could go on and on and on. And others, even like Mark Zuckerberg and others who talk about, eliminating fossil fuels. I mean, it's just crazy because they rely on it so much. Their companies and their institutions rely on fossil fuels. It's like they want to eliminate it for us, but keep it for them. What about nuclear energy? We haven't really done much with that either. And that is that a possible alternative, or could that compete with fossil fuels for viability? What do you think?
I think eventually, I think it's a really exciting alternative. But again, I think people really need to think about, are you really talking about like an experiment, a supplement, or a replacement? And when you're talking about experiments and supplements, you can be sort of very open-minded. But if you're talking about replacing something, particularly forcibly getting rid of the thing and then promising a replacement, there's nothing right now that justifies getting rid of fossil fuels on any, to any degree. But yeah, nuclear is amazing. It's very concentrated energy. It's naturally stored. It's like a battery. So it's not like the sun and the wind where you have you need some sort of battery to back it up, whether usually they just use fossil fuels as a battery. So it's stored, it's abundant. It had a lot of success in the late 60s and early 70s, but then the whole green movement really criminalized nuclear, which you would think is ironic because they claim to care so much about cleanliness and CO2 emissions. And nuclear is very clean and it doesn't emit CO2, at least in its main process, it doesn't. So, but it sort of points out, as I point out in Fossil Future, that really this is a movement that's hostile to all human impact on Earth. And so they don't like this new way of splitting the atom. And a lot of them just don't like the prospect of abundant nuclear energy. So with the green movement, we're not dealing with a movement that loves energy and just wants a different source. It's a movement that's hostile to energy. That's why they're anti-fossil fuel, anti-nuclear, anti-hydro, and they're also anti-mining and anti-development, which are hugely involved in solar and wind. So really I point this out in chapter 1 and chapter 3, it's an anti-human impact movement. And so you don't want to make the mistake of thinking, they just want to minimize the bad impacts. They want to minimize our impact as such, at least the leaders. That's what's driving them.
Yeah, it's almost religious in a sense. It's a really anti-human, very religious, almost for the most extreme, almost cult-like belief, which is why it's so difficult, I think, in targeting it. I want to get really quickly, because I know I'm keeping you, but these are so important, these issues, I think, and the fact that your thought process and the way you've handled, fossil fuels and explaining the importance of fossil fuels for humanity is just so unique. I don't really want to let you go here, but I have a couple more questions. American gas prices are going through the roof. I see it. I go to I put gas in my car. I can't believe how much I'm spending sometimes. And it's rising costs. It's part of our inflation crisis. What policy decisions has the Biden administration done that you believe set this crisis in motion? How much are moves like this limiting exploration and land leases, or, like I said before, blocking the Keystone Pipeline? I mean, is that contributing factor to all of this? I mean, what do we need to do to get out of it?
Yeah, I think it is a contributing factor, but I think many opponents of Biden make the mistake on focusing just on his specific anti-fossil fuel policy moves. And I think this is insufficient in two ways. One is the overall threat of the administration toward fossil fuel activity, I think, is the biggest thing. So you look at when you run on, I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuel, when that's one of your ideas. Think about what that does to industry and industry's confidence in investing in new projects. Because you're investing in new projects, maybe it's a minimum of 3 years, right, but maybe 4 years, 5 years. Why would you do this on, when you have a hostile administration? And you see in every department, they're threatening investment, they're threatening production, they're stopping or threatening transportation. So that's one thing, is the threat to the industry, not just the concrete things, is a really big thing. But the other thing is you have to think of the Biden administration as part of the global anti-fossil fuel movement that's been really prominent for the last 15 plus years. So Biden is part of that movement, but the Obama administration was. And what Europe is doing, what you have is this largely Western movement of mostly the freer nations that's suppressing investment, that's suppressing production, that's suppressing transportation. And so that artificially restricts the supply. And that means if demand goes up, you're in real trouble, which has happened. So it's the global anti-fossil fuel movement that is the root cause of this. And of course, the US figures are a big, are a huge contributor. And maybe next week or so, I'm going to put on Twitter a thread about basically how US Democrats could have averted a lot of this. And I'm not particularly political, and I don't identify actually as either major party. But if you think about, imagine in 2019, like when Democrats got power, imagine if they said, hey, you know what? The world needs far more energy. America can produce that largely using fossil fuels. We're going to liberate energy. We're going to liberate that. And let's say when Biden won, he had the same policy. We would be producing so much natural gas that we could export. Right. We'd be producing far more oil. Prices would be lower. And we would have been encouraging our allies to do the same. So we could have a world of energy abundance compared to today. And most of the really adverse consequences of the energy crisis would have been prevented because we, and to some extent our allies, would have been producing and transporting far more. So if you think about if we had had an energy freedom policy, the Democrats had been on board with that in 2019, the world would be a much better place. And so that points to, in 2022, that's what we need. We need an energy freedom policy that's saying, hey, we're going to liberate investment, production, transportation of fossil fuels and other forms of energy. And if people want to know more about that, they can just go to energytalkingpoints.com and search energy freedom. And I have a 5-point plan about how to liberate American energy.
I think that's just so impressive. That I'm so grateful that you're out there, that you are actually advising our lawmakers and our educators and our think tanks on what needs to be done. And you're absolutely right. This does go back to Obama. It goes back to previous administrations. I'm sure if I dug deep enough, I remember during the Obama administration, how many people from the Sierra Club and other environmental organizations jumped into the EPA. It was crazy. It was like the whole EPA became a makeup of the people that had worked at one point in time or another with these special interest groups that were anti-fossil fuel, anti-human. And so that became another big struggle. It's a bureaucracy. We had regulations against our businesses, and against our corporations. And I think really it is going to come from looking at this in a different way, seeing the reality, like what you're doing with Fossil Future in your book, letting people know, hey, you don't need to feel horrible about being a human, about utilizing what's best on our earth to take care of ourselves. And there's ways to do it that is, that are kind to our planet. I mean, we are. I mean, we're much better off now than we were before. So once again, please give that website, because I want everybody to be able to go there and I want everybody to be able to look for themselves.
Sure. So the website is easy to remember. It's just energytalkingpoints.com. And then there's a free weekly Substack newsletter that has the latest talking points. So I'd recommend it. And then you mentioned Fossil Future, so people can check it out if they really want to get in depth. It's a kind of massive book. I'm about to send you your signed copy of it. And if you want to know everything about this issue, and in particular how to think about it in a pro-human way, and why most approaches, explaining why most thinking is anti-human, I think Fossil Future, that's 3 years of my life trying to explain that step by step. And it's good for people who expect to agree with me, but it's really written for people who expect to disagree. So I think it'll be, if you're really interested in these issues, check it out. But in any case, check out energytalkingpoints.com.
Right. And just for people that want to learn, because if you believe we need to have a good fossil future and you want to be able to argue that against maybe your neighbor who's, the big Sierra Club member and who is completely opposed to it, you got to have those tools in your hands. You got to be able to say, well, this is the reason why. And you're going to do that when you get this book. Thank you so much, Alex, for being a part of the show. I hope you come back on. I think we're going to need you here. I think there's going to be a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of gnashing of teeth and eye-opening when it comes to Europe this winter. I pray for our brothers and sisters in Europe who are going to be suffering a lot because of these horrific mistakes by their leadership. And I hope they make it through this winter, unscathed. But unfortunately, we know what happens when you have cold winters and you have very little resources. So just keeping our fingers crossed and praying for our European brothers and sisters. Thank you again, Alex, for being on the show.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, here is some really big news, guys. Before we wrap this up, I want to share it with you because the New York governor's race, yes, the New York governor's race right now, according to Breitbart and other publications out there, is now at a toss-up. Yes, all right, Congressman Lee Zeldin, you are amazing. He's been on the show. You guys got to listen to her back in the earlier podcast. I've had Lee Zeldin on a few times. He is a remarkable man. He a true fighter for New York. He has never given up on New York. I remember when he decided to run for governor, there were people saying, oh, there's no way Republicans ever going to come close to winning. We have now Governor Kathy Hochul, and I'm like, and between that and Cuomo, I mean, Lee Zeldin would be a saving grace to New York, to the state of New York. It would be amazing. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, look at your choices. Look at the choice. Look at what's going on in New York City. Look at the surge in crime. Look at what's going on. I mean, you can't even get on a subway anymore. It's like back to the 70s again. It's pretty scary what's going on. But right now, Zeldin, listen to this. This is so great. This is like hopeful news. This is why there's going to be a huge red wave. Remember, I talked about the red wave early on when no one wanted to talk about a red wave. There will be a red wave because I have faith in our nation. I have faith in Americans. I know Americans believe in freedom and liberty and all those great things. And so now Zeldin, he's only 5.3% down from the Democrats. And this is according to Real Clear Politics average, showing 49% support, I can't even believe it still, for Hochul, and 43.7% support for the Long Island Republican congressman. That is huge. I mean, huge. I mean, you just you didn't even think we would see this, right? That's why I'm like keeping my fingers crossed in the Senate for Tiffany Smiley, right, in Washington State. She's right on the heels of Patty Murray. So we can do that there. Washington State can get another a seat for Republicans in the Senate. We've got right now Dr. Oz looking like he is going to take Pennsylvania. That will happen. I really hope so. That'll be crazy to have Fetterman in the Senate. I mean, it would just be, granted, we would have so many stories to write every single day about him while he's there, but that would be just insane for the people of Pennsylvania. I think it's, I talk to people some who say, well, it's a vote against Fetterman. Others who say they think Oz is going to bring a lot of stability, a business and common sense back to Pennsylvania. So that's a good thing. But so I wanted to look up, like Kathy Hochul sucks, like on the internet, just to see what's going on, right? Like people that don't like her. And it's awesome. If you guys put that in there, Kathy Hochul sucks, you will get like the most amazing merchandise right here. For all of you New Yorkers out there, I know you understand this. You don't really care about offending people. I think she's really done a horrific job. Mayor Adams, he sucks too. So let's just look at this. Kathy Hochul sucks. Save New York essential t-shirt. You could get that. That's at the top, right there at the top. It's got a 4.7 out of 5 rating. You can buy that. Apparently it's in stock right now. You've got Kathy Hochul sucks. Save New York stickers. You can get that. You can get a Kathy Hochul sucks 18-inch by 24-inch yard sign for the road. How about that? That would be amazing. Road signs. Oh, Kathy Hochul sucks. Lee Zeldin blasts Kathy Hochul for Inflation Reduction Act. We all know that's the Inflation Act. It's really not going to reduce anything. I don't know. There's just all kinds of amazing t-shirts and products that you can buy, New Yorkers, to support future Governor Lee Zeldin. This way, you'll have a much better state. You'll have common sense right there in New York. You'll have someone who will fight for you. You'll have someone who will care about you. You know what? I really don't care. I am endorsing because there is no way. There is no way I can't. I mean, There will be nobody better right now than Lee Zeldin for office in New York. And for those of you, I have friends in New York City who are just devastated by what's happened in their great state and in their city, what they've seen as far as crime, what they've seen as far as like the failure of their own state's leadership to stand by them and put them first. So God bless you, Lee Zeldin. Saying lots of prayers for you. I know you'll be a great fighter for the people of New York City. Tiffany Smiley, same for you. Dr. Oz, same for you. Hoping that we can see this red wave sweep America. I'm excited. I feel energized. I'm ready to go out there and do what I need to do and get those votes out, right? Let's do it. We don't have much time left. It's right around the corner, guys. November 8th is literally here. It's literally here. So let's get ready. Let's get out there. Let's do our part. Let's be a part of this great American dream and this great American, I would say, wonderful experiment. And let's prove to the world that we can make it happen. Peaceful transfer of power, red wave. Thank you for joining me. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state of Texas.